The morning Marcus Sterling divorced his wife of 35 years, he laughed. She was 60. She had $15,000, one suitcase, and a rusted sedan. He thought that was the end of her. 3 weeks later, she opened a door in the back of a crumbling Savannah building, and found the one thing that was going to cost him everything he'd ever built. He spent 2 years making sure she had nothing. He missed one envelope. She paid $15,000 for a building the whole town had written off. No heat. No running water. Walls that smelled like 40 years of salt and rot. People thought she'd lost her mind. Maybe she had. Or maybe Elena Sterling knew something nobody else did, that the most dangerous person in any room isn't the one making noise. It's the quiet one. Holding a brown envelope. Waiting. She'd been waiting 35 years. Marcus was about to find out why. That envelope had been sitting in a safe deposit box since 1984. And what was inside it didn't just threaten Marcus's fortune, it threatened to erase everything he'd ever built, right down to the foundation. If you're new here, subscribe. And tell me where you're watching from. Dallas, Texas, or anywhere in the country. Because this story is just getting started, and you don't want to pick it up in the middle. And drop a comment below. I'll read every single one. The building was a wreck and she knew it. Warped floorboards. A ceiling fan hanging by one wire. The kind of smell that tells you a place has been empty long enough to forget what people feel like. Marcus would have driven past it without blinking. That's exactly why she bought it. She spent that first morning walking the floors slowly, the property envelope never leaving her hand. Something kept pulling her back to 1984. To the version of herself that was young and sharp and believed in the man she married. Sterling Heights hadn't always been a skyline. It started as raw Georgia dirt and a stack of surveys nobody wanted to read. Marcus would show up to the job site in clean boots, shake a few hands, make a few speeches. Then he'd come home and Elena would already be at the kitchen table, permits spread out, deed transfers flagged, discrepancies circled in red ink. He built the reputation. She built the foundation. And she never once asked for the credit. On the second morning she found an old city planning folder mixed in with the boxes she'd packed in a hurry. She almost tossed it. Instead she opened it. Inside was a municipal easement map. Dated 1987. Dry and faded but completely intact. She sat down on the floor right where she was standing and spread it flat. The easement corridor ran in a straight clean line, directly beneath her building. A legal right-of-way the city had recorded decades ago and quietly forgotten about. Most people would have looked at that map and seen nothing. Elena saw everything. Because she knew what Marcus was currently building on the south end of Savannah. $200 million. Mixed-use development. The project he'd been positioning for 3 years, the one with his name already on the renderings before a single beam went up. That project had one path forward. It ran through her dirt. Every single inch of it. That night she lay on a cot from Goodwill with her coat still on. The cold had settled into the walls and wasn't going anywhere. No heat. No noise except the building doing what old buildings do, creaking, shifting, breathing. She thought about Marcus in the Buckhead mansion. 12-foot ceilings. The wine cellar she'd picked the stone for herself. She reached over in the dark and touched the envelope. He'd spent 2 years making sure she had nothing. He built his whole future on land he didn't own. And she was sleeping on top of it. She'd heard his name twice before she ever looked him up. Once from a woman at a church in Midtown whose landlord tried to seize her property through a paperwork loophole. Julian Vane spent 8 months untangling it and never sent a bill she couldn't afford. The second time was from Marcus, who'd called him a problem at a dinner party 4 years ago and then changed the subject. That was enough for Elena. His office was on the second floor of a narrow brick building off Bull Street. No receptionist. A hand-painted sign on the door. The kind of setup that told you he wasn't trying to impress anyone. He was at his desk when she walked in, reading something, glasses pushed down his nose. Late 40s. Calm in the way that certain people are calm, not because nothing bothers them, but because they've already decided what they're going to do about it. She sat down and put the envelope on his desk without saying a word. He looked at her. Then he opened it. The silence that followed was long enough that she started to worry. Julian set down the 1984 deed and leaned back in his chair. He took his glasses off. Rubbed the bridge of his nose. Where did you get this? It wasn't really a question. My grandmother, Elena said. She gave it to me the year before she died. Told me to keep it somewhere safe and never tell Marcus about it. Julian looked at the document again. Then at Elena. Do you understand what this is? She told him what she suspected. He told her she was right, and that it was worse than she thought. The man who sold Marcus the Sterling Heights land in 1984 had no legal right to sell it. The real title had been held by Elena's grandmother for decades, passed down through her family, never properly recorded in the county system, which is exactly how it slipped through. Marcus's lawyers hadn't dug deep enough. Or they had, and looked the other way. Either version was a problem for Marcus. Julian set the deed down flat on the desk like it was something fragile. Elena. He looked straight at her. He didn't just steal your marriage. He let that sit for a second. He's been trespassing on your family's soul for 30 years. She didn't cry in his office. She waited until she got back to the car. Then she sat there in the quiet for a long time, both hands on the wheel, thinking about her grandmother, who apparently knew exactly what she was doing. Marcus Sterling's penthouse sat on the 14th floor of a building he owned outright. Floor-to-ceiling windows. Unobstructed views of the Atlanta skyline. The kind of place designed to make everyone who walked into it feel slightly smaller than they actually were. That was the point. He was in a good mood that week. Elena was in Savannah playing house in a condemned building, his $200 million development was on schedule, and the divorce had gone exactly the way he'd planned it. Clean. Quiet. Total. He poured 2 glasses of bourbon and handed one to Sloane. She smiled and took it. Sloane was 38. Sharp. Beautiful in the specific way that made people underestimate how much she was paying attention. Marcus had married her 14 months after filing for divorce from Elena, fast enough that most people did the math and came up with the wrong answer. He trusted her completely. That was his second mistake. While Marcus stood at the window admiring his own skyline, Sloane was at her laptop. She'd been careful about it. Small transfers of data. A folder here. A transaction record there. Nothing that would trip the kind of monitoring software Marcus's IT team ran on the shared drives. She had been documenting his offshore transfers for 7 months. Shell companies routed through the Caymans. Assets quietly moved out of joint accounts before the divorce was even filed. The systematic scrubbing of Elena's contributions from 30 years of company records. Sloane had all of it. Every wire transfer. Every altered document. Every signature that had been conveniently removed from the official history of Sterling Enterprises. She copied the last file, ejected the drive, and slipped it into her jacket pocket. Then she walked back to the window and stood next to her husband. To Elena, Marcus said, raising his glass with a grin. Sloane raised hers. To Elena, she said. 3 days later, Elena got a text from a number she didn't recognize. I have everything. Transfers, records, the sanitizing job his lawyers did before the divorce. All of it documented. I want immunity when this falls apart. I think you know who this is. Elena read it twice. Then she called Julian. He was quiet for a moment when she told him. How serious is she? Serious enough to reach out to the woman her husband destroyed, Elena said. That's not someone playing games. Julian exhaled slowly. Then we just went from a land dispute, he said, to a federal case. Andre Sterling drove a blacked-out Range Rover and had his father's handshake. Firm. Deliberate. The kind that tells you he's already decided who has the power before you've said a word. Marcus had been teaching him that since he was 14. He pulled up to Elena's building on a Tuesday morning and sat in the car for a full minute before getting out. She heard the knock and opened the door. He looked around the space slowly, the cracked walls, the cot in the corner, the single lamp she'd picked up from a yard sale on Drayton Street. Something moved across his face. He covered it fast. Mom. Andre. He was dressed like his father. Same cut of suit. Same watch. She wondered if he even noticed anymore. He sat down across from her at the small table she'd set up near the window and folded his hands the way Marcus always did before delivering bad news. I came to help you, he said. She waited. He slid an envelope across the table. Thick. Sealed. There's $100,000 in there. You take it, you find somewhere decent to live, and you let this whole thing go quietly. He kept his voice even. Businesslike. Dad's not going to let this get embarrassing, and neither am I. Elena looked at the envelope. Then at her son. Who taught you to talk like that? He didn't answer. She got up, went to the back room and came back with the property envelope. She set it down in front of him and sat back down. Open it. Mom. Open it, Andre. He read slowly. She watched his face. It took about 4 minutes for the businessman to disappear and the son to come back. He set the deed down. Picked up the easement map she'd laid beside it. Then the copy Julian had pulled of the original 1984 sale, with the forged seller signature flagged in yellow. The room was very quiet. He knew, Andre said. It wasn't a question. His lawyers knew, Elena said. Which means he knew. Andre sat back in his chair and looked at the ceiling. A muscle worked in his jaw. Everything Marcus had ever told him about building something from nothing. About sacrifice and vision and what it takes to win. Andre had swallowed all of it. Built his whole identity around it. It was sitting on the table in front of him now. A lie with a flagged signature. He didn't touch the envelope he'd brought. He left it on the table when he walked out. Julian filed the quiet title action on a Thursday morning. By Friday afternoon it had leaked. Elena didn't know how. Julian suspected someone in the county clerk's office with a phone and a contact at the Savannah Business Journal. It didn't matter. By the weekend, the words Sterling title scandal were sitting in a headline, and Marcus's PR team was already on fire. She read the article at her small table with a cup of coffee and didn't feel the need to smile. She just felt steady. He showed up Monday. No call ahead. No lawyers with him, which told her everything. This wasn't an official visit. This was Marcus doing what Marcus always did when something threatened him. He came to look it in the eye and make it smaller. She heard the car first. Then the knock. She opened the door and there he was, custom suit, no tie, the specific expression he wore when he was angry but needed to appear unbothered. The laughter was gone. He looked around the building the same way Andre had. But where Andre's eyes had softened, Marcus's went hard. "You've made your point," he said. She stepped aside and let him in. He didn't sit. He stood in the middle of the room with his hands in his pockets and laid it out like he was doing her a favor. The company would offer her a settlement. A real one this time, not the $15,000 insult from the divorce. He named a number that would have made a different version of Elena exhale with relief. "You walk away," he said. "This headline dies. Everybody moves on." He said it cleanly. No threats. Just the quiet confidence of a man who had never once been told no by someone with less money than him. Elena let him finish. Then she picked up the property envelope from the table and held it at her side. "I don't want your money, Marcus." His jaw tightened. "I'm not looking for a settlement." She met his eyes and held them. "I'm looking for my heritage." The room went still. For just a second, one single second, she saw it. The flicker behind his eyes. Not anger. Something older than anger. Fear. He recovered fast. Put the unbothered look back on and buttoned his jacket. "You're making a mistake. You made yours in 1984, she said. "I'm just now correcting it." He left without another word. She locked the door behind him, sat down, and let her hands shake for exactly 1 minute. Then she called Julian. The boardroom was on the 32nd floor downtown. Glass walls. Long table. The kind of room built to remind you that power has an address, and today, Marcus Sterling owned it. He arrived with 4 lawyers and the easy confidence of a man who had never lost a room in his life. Set his portfolio down. Nodded at Elena like she was a scheduling conflict. Sat down. He wasn't worried. That was the thing about Marcus. He was always most dangerous when he wasn't worried. Julian opened quietly. He laid out the title action. Walked through the easement. Presented the municipal records 1 page at a time with the patience of a man who had already won and was simply explaining how. Marcus's lead attorney interrupted twice. Julian let him. Then kept going. Elena sat still the entire time. Hands folded. Eyes forward. 35 years of being the quietest person in every room Marcus occupied had prepared her for exactly this. 1 more hour wasn't going to hurt. Then Julian nodded at her. She reached into the envelope and placed the 1984 deed flat on the table. 1 document. Yellowed at the edges. Her grandmother's name in the upper left corner. A notary stamp that had survived 4 decades without losing a single detail. Marcus's lead attorney picked it up. The second leaned over to look. The room changed. Julian let the silence sit for a long moment before he spoke. "The man who sold you the Sterling Heights land in 1984 had no legal right to sell it. The valid title belonged to Elena's family. It was never legally transferred." He kept his voice completely flat. "Which means Sterling Heights, the flagship property, the development, everything your company was built on, was never yours." He closed his folder. "You've been trespassing for 30 years, Marcus. We're not selling. We're evicting." Marcus didn't move. But his lawyers did. The lead attorney was already on his feet, phone to his ear, voice low and tight. The second was going through the deed page by page looking for a crack that wasn't there. Julian had spent 4 months making sure of that. Then came the knock on the glass. Two men in dark suits who hadn't been part of either legal team stepped into the room. Federal investigators. Sloane's files had landed 3 days earlier. Wire transfers. Offshore accounts. A paper trail that turned a land dispute into something that would follow Marcus Sterling for the rest of his life. He looked at Elena. For the first time since the driveway, since the laughing, since the suitcase, since the rusted sedan, he had nothing to say. She didn't look away. The federal investigation didn't make noise at first. That's how these things work. Quietly at first, a freeze here, a subpoena there, phone calls that don't get returned. Marcus had been through enough boardroom battles to know that noise was manageable. It was the silence that should have scared him. The asset freeze hit on a Wednesday. Sterling Enterprises accounts. The development fund. 3 LLCs that weren't supposed to exist on paper but did, because Sloane had the paperwork to prove it. Marcus's attorneys filed an emergency motion before noon. A federal judge denied it before 4. By Thursday morning it was on the front page. Not the Savannah Business Journal this time. The Wall Street Journal. The board met without him. That was the first sign. Emergency session. Closed door. Marcus wasn't invited to a meeting he'd run for 20 years, in a building with his name on the lease. They voted to suspend him by dinner. He found out through his assistant, who had already started forwarding her resume. Andre's deposition was scheduled for a Friday. He showed up alone. No family attorney. No one Marcus had sent. Just Andre in a plain dark suit sitting across from federal investigators with a folder of his own. He spoke for 3 hours. He walked them through everything Elena had shown him, the fraudulent deed, the forged seller signature, the shell company structure Marcus had used to obscure the original land acquisition. Andre had spent 2 weeks after visiting his mother pulling his own threads, finding his own documents, arriving at his own conclusions. He didn't do it for revenge. He did it because he'd spent his whole life being built in his father's image and had only just realized what that image was worth. When it was over he called Elena. She picked up on the second ring. He didn't say much. Just, "It's done, Mom." She said, "I know. Thank you." That was enough. The mansion sold at auction 6 weeks later. The vacation homes followed. The cars. The art collection Elena had curated over 15 years of marriage and never been credited for. Marcus Sterling, who had laughed in a driveway 90 days ago while his wife loaded a single suitcase into a rusted sedan, was left with a pending federal indictment, a estranged wife, and a son who had chosen the truth over the family name. The empire he'd spent 35 years building came apart in a season. Just like Elena always knew it would. The foundation was never solid. She'd read the surveys. The grand opening of the Blackwood Center fell on a Saturday in early spring. Savannah does something particular in that season, the air goes soft, the squares fill up, the city remembers it's beautiful. Elena had chosen the date on purpose. She wanted the light to be right. The building was unrecognizable. Same bones. Same address. Same patch of ground that Marcus had written off as worthless and a grieving woman had paid $15,000 for on the worst week of her life. But the boards were gone from the windows. The walls were clean. The entrance had a cornerstone with a single name carved into it. Blackwood. Not Sterling. Not a corporation. Not a shell company registered in the Caymans. Her grandmother's name. In granite. On a building that sat on land her family had owned since before Marcus Sterling was born. The room filled up by noon. City officials. Preservation advocates. Journalists who 6 months ago had been writing about the Sterling title scandal and were now writing about something harder to reduce to a headline, a woman who had quietly refused to disappear. Elena moved through the room the way she always had. Unhurried. Present. Listening more than talking. Julian found her near the window. "Your grandmother would have loved this," he said. Elena looked out at the street below. "She built it first," she said. "I just finished it." Andre came late and stood near the back. She saw him before he saw her. He looked lighter than he had in years, like he'd put down something heavy and was still getting used to walking without the weight. She went to him. They didn't need many words. They rarely did now. He looked at the cornerstone through the window and nodded slowly. That was enough. The letter arrived the following week. Plain envelope. Prison return address. Marcus's handwriting, still precise, still controlled, still the penmanship of a man who believed presentation was everything. He needed help. Financial. Just a loan, he wrote. Temporary. Elena read it once at her desk in the building that used to smell like salt and rot and now smelled like fresh paint and cedar. She didn't burn it. She folded it carefully and slid it into the back of the property envelope, behind the 1984 deed, behind the easement map, behind everything that had saved her. A reminder. Marcus Sterling had spent his whole life knowing the price of everything. He never once understood the value of anything. She set the envelope down, looked out at the Savannah skyline, the city she had helped build, finally with her name on something, and felt, for the first time in a long time, completely still. She was 60 years old. She was just getting started. I'm